All right. Well, thank you. It is such an honor and a privilege to be with everybody this morning. And it's really a big honor for me to be able to share the stage with Mr. Martin here. He's currently the CEO for Taco Mac, which is um, a restaurant throughout the Southeast. They have around 27 locations. So happy to share the stage with you, Harold, and thank you for being with us today. So I just want to start by maybe talking about some of the big, bold steps that you took along your journey to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I will say I have such deep respect for people who take all the skills and capabilities it requires to run complex organizations and invest that time selflessly, particularly in young people. So I was raised by two public servants. My dad was an educator his entire life. In fact, he retires on Wednesday. It's his last day of a very long, storied career. And I will tell you, as the child of someone who committed their lives to young people, far more than money and accolade and prestige or any of the other things that people outside of this room may aspire to, it means a lot when your kids and your family and your friends see the impact that you've had over a very long time. So I'm happy to play a small part in this program. I worked at McKinsey and Company for almost 10 years. I was a management consultant. I made PowerPoint decks effectively for a living. I traveled a lot. Um, and in 2014, we found out we were expecting our first child. Ended up being two children. So I have twin 9-year-olds, Harold and Serena, who are amazing little human beings. It was a big wake up call for me that said, this is not the job that I was meant to be in. I'm not meant to be on the road traveling all the time. And so it's time for me to get to living the life that I've always wanted to live. And so I decided to leave that job, and I was very committed to being an entrepreneur. I'm not creative enough to start a business, but I knew I could acquire a business, optimize it, scale it over time. And then if I just stayed true to that journey long enough, that hopefully we'd be able to figure it out. So we bought a single unit restaurant about a year and a half later. And that sounds like a very short time, but when you're living, it is not a short time at all. And so about a year and a half in, and I started acquiring restaurants. One thing that's interesting is I don't know how to cook. Let me be more clear. I have never cooked an entire meal in my life. Now, what that means is I've eaten at a lot of restaurants. I've always been relying on restaurants. And so at that time, we were looking to acquire a business. I looked at a lot of different industries. And about a year in, it was very clear that I was making no progress. I wasn't any closer to acquiring a business than I was a year prior. And my biggest insight was that I was not focused sufficiently on an industry where I had a differentiated thesis and I could bring together, business to acquire, the requisite investors and financing, and then ultimate leadership to run that business. And so, as a consultant would, so I did a lot of work, did a whole scan, and then decided I'm going to choose the one industry I've never worked in, where the core is cooking food, which is an activity I don't know how to do. And said I'm going to invest in restaurants. And primarily it was because they were local in nature. I didn't want to travel. That was important. They traded at reasonable multiples. They were relatively easy to finance. And by my estimation, they were also under-led and undermanaged. So anyway, I was very committed to restaurants. And then we ultimately acquired our first restaurant in 2016. We acquired a small portfolio in 2017. And we ultimately acquired Taco Mac in 2018. And then we've been acquiring single unit brands. I won't make any plugs, by the way, for how y'all should spend your evenings and where y'all should eat this evening. But I've been very, very grateful to be a part of the hospitality industry in Atlanta.
Right. Well, I mean, the impressive part to that too, to me, is, I mean, you've done all this in like a span of like 18 years, like, all these accomplishments. So it says a lot about you and your character and your drive. And just curious, like, what motivates you?
Well, one, I'll tell you, I don't lack for motivation at all. I don't know how other people experience life, but I find motivation every day. I mean, walking into this room, it's one thing when we were talking about this program. It's a different thing when you're in the room. I'm listening to the introductory remarks. I'm looking at all the people here and all the hard work that goes into that. And, frankly, I'll leave this room thinking, what more should I be doing? I try to really focus on directing that motivation toward disciplined behaviors that will change my approach and the results. Because it's one thing to feel motivated. People feel motivated all the time. But let's say I leave this room and I say, man, I've gotten further from young people than I'd like to be. And I feel motivated. Before I do anything else, I want to bottle that up and say, okay, well, what am I going to do differently? Is it going to be today? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it a month from now? Is it a year from now? Make that commitment, codify that commitment, and then hold myself accountable to it.
Obviously, again, throughout your career, you've had the opportunity to take some big, bold steps, but that requires risk, taking on some risks. So, what are some of the biggest risks that you took, and why did how did you overcome maybe some of that fear that some of us have to take that step forward?
To get big outcomes requires risk. There's just no other way. By my estimate, again, what do I know? But my observing other people, the people who I admire the most, who were most successful, took some risk at some point. And so I don't think you can get one without the other. So once you accept that, then the question is, what risks are you willing to take, and what goals are important enough for you to take those risks? And then once you get comfortable with that, then it's just about execution and managing your own temperament. The way I got comfortable was intellectualizing it. What I determined or believed, I shouldn't say determined, what I believed was success was inevitable. It was just a question of how long it would take. So then the question was, am I willing to run the whole race? It might take a year. It might take 5 years. And we've got to be prepared for that. And at no point waver, because the worst thing we can do is get 3 years into a 5-year journey and then pull back and we never know. So I intellectualized it and just said, I'm wired to run the full race. I am not going to give up under any circumstances. And then once you commit to that, you just got to do it. So after this experience, which was in 2000 and this was in 2014, 2014, and by 2016, I feel like we were starting to make progress. And then we had a really tragic situation at Morehouse where we had an interim president pass away suddenly from an aneurysm. And I had never had any experience with anything like that, but it's, he's fully engaged and doing a wonderful job at the college. And then he passed away. He's not there the next day. And at that point, I was sitting on the board. Someone has to step in. That's just how it works, right? And so I don't consider, in retrospect, we had just raised some money. We were in the process of acquiring some additional restaurants. We've made some commitments to other investors. And I had to call those investors and say, hey, I'm not going to be available for a while. And I don't know how long it's going to be, because we had to run a search to find a permanent president ultimately. But I will say again, to the point of, does it feel like a risk? Sure. I didn't know what was going to happen on the other side. I didn't know how those investors were going to respond. I didn't know if that would stall the momentum of the business we were building in the restaurant space. But, life is short. You get one. Overly focusing on risk leads to mediocrity, because you're just not willing to make any big decisions. And I just don't want to be wired that way. So anyway, I can talk a lot about risk. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, you embrace risk. That's just a part of the game. Sometimes you take a risk, and 6 months in, you realize it's not working.
Right.
And you've got to have the humility to say that didn't work and pivot. The worst thing you can say, because I mentioned entrepreneurship and said, I'm going to go the whole way regardless. Well, that's because I know that works. Like, I didn't know it worked for me, but I knew in our society, if people are willing to put capital at risk and invest their time and they have a thesis that works in the marketplace, they will be successful in time.
Right. Well, and we've got a lot of leaders in the room today. And obviously, in order to lead a great organization, it takes a great team. And I imagine you've had great team to support you throughout your journey. And be curious as we think about leadership and we think about what it takes and having that team. What are the qualities that you look for from a high performing team?
One theme you'll see from me is I try to study other people. One thing I saw from entrepreneurs I respected, who are much older than me, was they had members of their team that had been with them for decades. I had not met any very successful entrepreneurs who their whole team was new. was, well, this is my executive assistant. She's been with me for 50 years. Or, yeah, there's so many examples. And so as an entrepreneur, I'm looking for people who are willing to build something over time, right? So fundamentally, my hope is that there's a fit, there's an alignment of values, and I can figure out the rest.
All right. Well, and then even just again thinking about our theme here and what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, bigger, better, bolder. There's some significant goals that I imagine as we walk away from this conference that each organization is going to set. And so, again, kind of thinking about the team and thinking about like we've got big goals that we want to achieve. How do you rally a team around setting and accomplishing some of those big goals that may not necessarily have been their vision, but are the vision that you're trying to share and get them to embrace?
Yep. Well, the first is I think deeply about it to make sure it's something I believe we should do. So I don't try to crowdsource strategy. I don't go to our room and, by the way, nothing against this. I was a consultant for a long time, but I'm not my style of leadership is not, let's all go in a room. We have a blank sheet of paper. We have no idea what we're going to do. And let's figure it out together. That's just not my leadership style. That way work for other people, but it's not natural for me. So what I try to do with our team is give our team something to react to. So I'll think a lot about what I think the right direction is. I'll think a lot about what the why is, the data supporting that, and I will lay that out for our team to consider and digest. And sometimes I'll have a couple of people review it, refine it first. And I'll give people time to think about it, right? This is what I think we should do. Here's why I think we should do it. Here's the information that supports it. Sometimes I'll spend time thinking about, here are the counter arguments. And here's how I would think about those counter arguments, because I want to play out the whole discussion. Then we'll get in a room, we'll talk about it, we'll discuss it. And then once we agree on that direction, we are doing it no matter what. So I will say there's a don't take no for an answer approach that I've just seen work in my life. And I don't want to presume that I understand the difficulty of the roles that you guys are in, but I imagine that there are times where you think you're the only person who gets it. And you're the only person who's willing to push beyond where others are willing to push, because ultimately you're responsible. I'm going to be here. I'm going to have to own it, whether it works or not. And I'm willing to own it, whether it works or not. I give you a very specific example in our business. In 2019, we just acquired Taco Mac. Well, this is a little bit of a geeky restaurant story, so I will prepare you in advance. So when we acquired Taco Mac, 0% of our sales were from third-party providers. Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash. 0%. It didn't exist. Today, that number is much higher, by the way. But as that was growing, mechanically, what would happen is DoorDash would give you a tablet. Every time an order would come in, you'd press accept, and you'd have to type that order into the POS. It looked. And so as the sales were growing, I'm looking at our poor team members. They've got a Grubhub tablet, a DoorDash tablet, an Uber Eats tablet. They're accepting, trying to type in. It was terrible. And I would sit with the team. I'm like, this is impossible. Like you need more people. It just doesn't work. So I've been sort of talking to people about potential solutions. And what I learned was you could integrate those solutions into your POS and they would go directly in. Nobody have to type anything in. Fewer errors, fewer labor. So that's great. And we were like just big enough in this region where they were looking for some pilot brands that were just big enough, right? Not too big if there were issues, but also not so small that you couldn't get credit for it. So anyway, go to our IT team and say, we have to do this. It's actually not an option. We have to do this. I had one team member quit because it was just an unreasonable expectation on the timeline that we were going to have. And that happens sometimes. And then I had one team member, I won't call him by name, but if he ever saw this, he knows who he is. He grumbled, but he got it done. It took about 8 weeks, give or take. So, and by the way, even after it was done, this was unnecessary. This timeline was ridiculous, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, those all things may be true. But what I'll tell you is 3 weeks later, COVID happened. All of your dine-in sales go away. Everything is to go. And restaurants all over were having to close because they could not process the orders fast enough. You just can't do it. You get 10 orders in a minute. You just can't type them in fast enough. It doesn't work. But one brand at least did not have that problem. And we did not have that problem because we had an unreasonable leader with unreasonable goals and an unreasonable timeline 90 days ago. And so sometimes you just have to be that person.
What's the one piece of advice that you would leave us as we prepare to move forward in this conference?
Yeah. So I got out of the advice business. You know, I found that you give a lot of advice. Some people take it, some people don't. So I went to the after school program my whole life, up until I was finally able to convince my parents I could just go home after school. That was my whole life. To this day, the person outside of my family who I am most excited to see when I go home is Miss Harriet, who is the executive director of the YMCA. To this day, she happens to be a member of our church, so I get to see her, and I can tell her things that are happening in my life, and tell her about the kids, and tell her about our business. And all I want her to know is it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, I
So
appreciate
it's not so much advice, but I will tell you it's worth it. What you do every day. And I don't know if it feels that way every day, but it absolutely is.
Well, we thank you for those words and appreciate you spending time with us. So let's give Mr. Martin a round of applause.